Hello, everyone, and welcome back. My name is August Gorman. I am wearing a dark green sweater. I have a plain white wall behind me and part of a refrigerator. I am a postdoctoral scholar at Princeton University, and I am a disabled philosopher of disability. I enjoyed being a panelist last year for this conference, and I'm very honored this year to be able to chair this session and introduce the next speaker, Dr. Jonathan Flowers. Dr. Jonathan Flowers is a professorial lecturer in the Department of Philosophy and Religion at American University. Flowers' research areas include African American intellectual history, Japanese aesthetics, American pragmatism, philosophy of disability, and philosophy of technology. His current research focuses on the affective ground of experience, identity, and personhood, with a specific emphasis on race, gender, and disability as felt orientations in and towards the world. I have personally benefited from following Dr. Flowers on Twitter for his incisive cultural criticism and been a benefit of his really thoughtful ideas about pedagogy. And again, I am just thrilled to welcome him to talk about digital phrenology and automated ableism, reproducing racist and ableist logics through artificial intelligence. Thank you.
So thanks for that wonderful introduction. I'm actually quite happy to be back at the conference. And much of what I'm going to be talking about today is unsurprisingly an extension of what I spoke about at the last conference. So this project is a modification of a forthcoming work on AI, disability, and race. So as I began my research on the intersections of AI, disability, and race, something occurred to me. The concerns about AI as it applies to disability are parallel extensions of the concerns about AI and race, gender, and other marginalized identities. Put another way, these concerns are extensions of the organization of our ongoing world around structures of normativity and oppression. While there's not enough time in this talk to expand on this idea, put simply, we should understand this drive to normalize abnormal, or we should understand this as the drive to normalize abnormal embodiments in line with a presumed default organization. Oh, and I forgot, I'm a youngish Black man wearing glasses and a cozy gray sweater. So this motivates the three endeavors of this talk. First, in contra to the talk's title, AI do not necessarily reproduce the ideologies of ableism and racism. They extend them not only through their iteration, but the ways in which these ideologies structure the research programs, the test cases, and the very field of computational sciences from which these technologies emerge. Second, this extension, as I briefly indicated, is not due to the inherent nature of science as inquiry, but the result of inquiry performed within a racist, ableist, and cis-sexist context. In short, the computational sciences and their products are merely the latest iteration of the ways in which science as an instrument has been directed and organized by ideological structures that preceded its development. Third, in light of the ways that AI and the computational sciences are parallel with and extend the technologies of oppression that preceded their rise, there can be no ethical use of these techniques and technologies as they were intended. I say as they were intended to point to the possibility of redeploying or using differently these technologies in ways that enable the development of disabled persons. However, the continued use and development of these technologies as intended does not serve the aims of disability. Rather, it serves the aim of correcting or bringing disability in line with the norm. As with much of my work, I begin with the world, drawing on Ahmed and Tremaine. Previously, I have argued that ableism structures a world that cannot be inherited by disabled bodies. This was the content of my previous talk at this conference. To arrive in the world disabled is to arrive already positioned as wrong through the ways in which the body itself is out of place or not at home, or unlike the other bodies whose repeated activities have resulted in a history that organizes the world in its image. In a world organized around ability, to be born disabled is to inherent an orientation or a proximity towards the world that, as Ahmed notes, points to a past that is behind, that is prior to our arrival, and thus structures the kinds of actions we can take in the world. In the context of a world where models of disability that presume disability as an inherent fault in an individual precede the disabled body into the world, the requirement that we inherit the line presupposed by ability is implicit in the moral imperative to fix or repair a disabled person. To this end, for Ahmed, for a life to count as a good life, it must return the debt of its life by taking on the direction promised as a social good, which means imagining one's futurity in terms of reaching certain points along a life course. Such points accumulate, creating the impression of a straight line. This is a line that is disrupted by disabled embodiment as organized by the various models of disability that supply the meaning of the disabled body. Now, to be clear, it is not the case that all pasts structure worlds that cannot be inherited. A past of disability resistance, if normalized in the present as an organizing principle, would enable a world that can be inherited by disabled bodies. Such a past would project a line through the world that values and renders at home disabled persons. However, such a past would have to be a displacing of the current history of institutionalization, medicalization, and marginalization and ableism that currently serves to structure the world had by disabled persons. In short, for such a past to become an organizing force in the world of the present, the past would have to displace or otherwise render less meaningful the past that currently orients disabled bodies in the present. So what do I mean by extend ideologies? To this end, when I present AI and the computational sciences as extending the ideologies that organize the world described previously, I am referring to the ways in which the instrument of the sciences, including the computational sciences, the methodology of science, and the results that ultimately emerge from it are not concerned with the politics of scientific practitioners or the people who deploy them in action. Put another way, for Dewey, the processes and equations that govern nuclear fission are agnostic to either their use in nuclear weapons or nuclear reactors. Similarly, the processes of epidemiology are agnostic to their work in either treating the COVID-19 pandemic or in developing bioweapons for the military. Still further, the processes of machine vision are agnostic to their use in detecting healthy fish, locating spotted leopards in the wild, or detecting the emotional responses of autistic persons for the purposes of disciplining them in line with normative embodiments. It is for this reason that I have not located the fault with AI. Again, to turn to Dewey, locating fault with AI or science as an instrument would be to mythologize the instrument or give it some agency beyond its status as an instrument. Again, for the sake of time, to mythologize science or AI is to personalize it and render it possible of transacting with the world on its own. AI and science cannot do this. It can only adapt itself or be adapted to the ends of the humans that deploy it or the histories that shape those ends. Insofar as these ends are those that have been determined in advance of the development of science by the organization of the world around pasts that maintain ideologies of ableism and racism that do not reckon with these histories of ableism and racism, they have enabled the forward march of the sciences, including the computational sciences, and the ongoing mythologization that will carry forward ableism and racism as part of the myth of a brighter future ushered in by AI and scientific progress. To provide a contemporary example of the history that organizes the computational science around ableism and racism, I turn to Birhane and Guest's 2020 paper, Decolonizing the Computational Sciences, in which they argue that the computational sciences are quote, built on a foundation of racism, sexism, colonialism, Anglo and Eurocentrism, white supremacy, and all intersections thereof. Crucially, Birhane and Guest point to Galton, Fisher, and Pearson as indicative of the ways in which the computational sciences are predicated upon eugenics through their privileging and development of the field of statistics, a field crucial to the development of contemporary AI and its applications to the world. Galton, for example, declared that, quote, the average intellectual standard of the Negro race is some 2 grades below our own, a fact that he attributed to the genetic deficiency of African Americans and members of the African diaspora in comparison to white Americans. Putting aside the impossibility of ranking intelligence, this point is worth bearing in mind, as Galton is noted as the individual most responsible for the development of regression and correlation in statistics, which enables statisticians to measure the degree to which a given variable predicts another variable. In machine learning and AI, these models are most often used in predictive modeling of the kinds found in crime prediction algorithms and other modes of predictive analytics, which transform data into recommendation for actions in future cases. Galton is, more pressingly, also responsible for the idea that ability and intelligence follow a normal distribution, a bell curve, which lends itself to the title of the book of the same name. While Galton is but one example, he is not alone. Pearson and Fisher also dabbled, to put it lightly, in eugenicist thinking, and this thinking is part of the organizing narrative of the field of statistics and the deployments of scientific development that follow from it, including the computational sciences. Put another way, it is not simply that scientists have engaged in the production of improved theoretical structures divorced from the social context. In the case of Pearson, Fisher, and Galton, as Aubrey Clayton states, quote, in service to their socio-political agenda, they established the statistician as an authority figure, a numerical referee who is by nature impartial, they claimed, since statistical analysis is just unbiased number crunchy. And it is through this establishment of the statistician as an authority that they enabled the establishment of the automated statistician, the AI, as an authority. The foregoing discussion is valuable insofar as, according to Tarleton Gillespie, quote, algorithms are inert, meaningless machines until paired with databases on which to function. And as articulated above, the data that is organized into a database or even collected is not done so from a neutral standpoint. It is done so in line with ideologies and structures of marginalization that precede the development of data collection methodologies into the world. To return to my initial point about the organization of the world, the data is collected in and from a world already organized by ableism and racism, made straight, white, male, and able-bodied through histories of colonialism that maintain the idea of a normative body. However, to understand the concern articulated here, it may be helpful to appeal to John Dewey's distinction between social facts and physical facts. A physical fact, for Dewey, exists regardless of the attitudes that humans adopt toward it. A social fact, in contrast, requires the implication of human aims and concern. Physical facts are what statisticians and other computational scientists claim to be measuring or interacting with. The reality is that they are merely playing with social facts, as these facts are meaningless without a web of human interests to make them meaningful. If we are to put this in the context of disability, a form of embodiment may exist regardless of human attitudes towards it. The embodiment itself is a physical fact. The relations of the biological structures of a body remain the same regardless of the attitude taken towards it. For example, one cannot pray away mental illness or disability. A form of embodiment becomes a social fact when the meaning of that embodiment is associated with negative life outcomes. This is the case with disability when viewed through the philosophical models of disability that treat it as an aberration from the norm. This is also the case with AI. So to this end, no AI deployed against disabled persons ever engages in a process of detection or prediction. It, like crime prediction algorithms, as noted by Rua Benjamin, engages in a process of production of disabled persons through its alignment with the ideologies of disability that pre-exist the AI. Put another way, AI are disability production algorithms, extensions of a biopolitical project of constraining the possible ways of being in the world of disabled persons through the ways in which they shape disability and disabled persons from the raw materials of the social facticity of our existence. Insofar as the social facticity of disabled existence is one structured by hermeneutic injustice that denies the possibility of disabled persons having meaningful lives, the results of AI will consequently mirror these implications. So it is here, and by way of conclusion, that I turn to a question asked by the disabled philosopher and poet, Audre Lorde. Quote, what does it mean when the tools of a racist patriarchy are used to examine the fruits of that same patriarchy? It means that only the most narrow parameters of change are possible and allowable. More specifically, I want to ask, what does it mean when the tools of a world organized around a colonial project of ableism are used to examine the fruits of that same colonial project? It means that only the most narrow parameters of human being in the world are possible and allowable, as the following slides will demonstrate. Rua Benjamin, in her book, The New Jim Code, provides the example of the spirometer, a device for measuring lung capacity, as one of the ways in which ideologies are grounded, racist ideologies are grounded in technology. I have selected this example as demonstrated on the slide because, as Benjamin notes, the use of this technology was widely spread in the early to mid 90s to deny Black workers disability claims, specifically with regards to the effects of inhaling asbestos on their lungs, because it was assumed that Black workers had naturally lower lung capacity. They would be required to demonstrate more severe symptoms of disability. Put another way, the technology used to determine disability in the context of lung capacity was ultimately biased against African Americans on the basis of a racist ideology about the biophysical organization of Black bodies. Insofar as this structures the ways in which one could or could not be produced as a disabled subject through technology, this remains an important historical fact when we think about the intersection of disability and modern technology. So my second example here is from Oz Keyes's wonderful article, wherein they provide a history or a description of the ways in which artificial intelligence is used to, one, first discern autistic traits, and then second, provide appropriate work environments for autistic persons. While there is not enough time to fully summarize Keyes's conclusions, one thing stands out, and I will quote directly. If autistic people are being constructed by AI practitioners as incapable of agency and full humanity in an ethical framework that treats agency and full humanity as mutual dependencies of each other, and both as a necessary prerequisite for participating in the frameworks to address injustices, then we have an impasse. Put another way, if autistic people are being constructed by AI practitioners in light of negative life circumstances due to their autism, for Keyes, no ethical structure that intends to address the ethical implications of AI will ever be able to fully capture the kinds of hermeneutic and material injustices experienced by persons with disability through their implication in AI systems. And finally, this is my last slide. Finally, the project of artificial intelligence emotion detection, at least I argue, is connected thoroughly to a project of maintaining a biopolitical order aimed at marginalizing and rendering visible disability for its elimination. Insofar as AI emotion detection technology is intended to assess emotions for deviance from a presumed norm, any failure to align with the norm predicted ahead of the AI technology will be considered a deviation and in need of disciplining. The same kind of disciplinary order which structures other kinds of technological attempts to translate sign language into spoken speech, which presumes that spoken speech is some way a superior mode of communication, or as the slide indicates, AI targeted at disabled people implicitly promises to make them more like non-disabled people based on the implied understanding that non-disabled is the norm. So to this end, what does it mean when the tools of a world organized around a colonial project of ableism are used to examine the fruits of the same colonial project? It means that there can be no uses of artificial intelligence for the support of people or disabled persons unless said uses are not what is intended by the developers. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Flowers. We'll now have a question and answer. Please put your questions in the Q&A.
Well, maybe while we're waiting, August, I could come in if that's okay. So that last slide, Jonathan, the heading you gave, there can be no disability-focused AI that is not itself ableist. I mean, that is a very bold claim, isn't it? And I mean, you gave an example. I hadn't heard of that particular example, which was pretty horrific. I agree. But could it be a failure of imagination? I mean, I think, you know, I mean, if you think about the sorts of claims that, say, Steve Silberman has made about who programmers are, quite often they're neurodiverse in the first place. And so could it not be that if we really allowed programmers to use their imaginations, they would come up with things that were genuinely assistive without mimicking an idea of what a normal person is? Is that not possible, or have I missed something?
You have not missed something, but the if in your statement is doing a whole lot of work, right? It is doing a massive amount of work. And that if is only possible if, again, here's an if the field in which these developments are made is one that has reckoned with its predication on a history that leads to the kinds of horrific AI technologies that we've been talking about. So yes, I don't disagree, but that's an ideal solution in a non-ideal context. There are few projects that I can think of with regards to AI and machine learning that are genuinely assistive. And if I'm going to be, I might be a little bit transparent for a moment, there are plenty of ways that even the most basic AI or machine learning platform can be repurposed as an assistive technology. A complex version of Siri, for example, could be an assistive piece of assistive technology for folks with executive processing issues. Amy Kavanaugh has a good article about the ways in which her smartphone enabled her to participate in the political process in Britain after, I believe, legislation enabled smartphone use as assistive devices in voting, right? That took a legislation to enable a non-standard use of a piece of technology. And if we're going to be real clear about this, the iPhone has a fraught history of ignoring, say, non-normative bodies, lest we forget that the Apple Health app, when it was initially developed, could not track or keep track of the menstrual cycles of people who had them, right? It was as if they did not exist. So the if in your question is doing an atlas level of work. It is bearing the world in that context. And it's an if that I would agree with if, right? Again, another atlas level if we lived in an ideal world. This is a non-ideal kind of understanding.
Sure. So can I follow up, because I think you know what you've done is at least open my eyes to the ways in which, you know, assistive technologies, we understand it, and many things we're doing is just replicating the old sort of medical understanding of disability in a different way. So what we're doing is trying to get some devices so people can change so they can fit in the world, right? But I don't think we have to go a long way into ideal theory to think about, let's just change our paradigm. So let's think about what people with disabilities themselves would like out of technology, and to think about how that can be done, which isn't just mimicking a normal way, you know, scare quotes, normal way of life. So it feels to me like you're opening, you know, this paper is so helpful in that it presents a type of challenge to tech to do things differently rather than helping people do things the same. But do you not see it like that? I mean,
I do see it like that, but I don't think it will be read like that.
Okay.
Right. So in order to change a set of habits, you have to indicate the ways that these habits are just bad to start with, right? To go back to Dewey, right? A person with poor posture doesn't know that they have poor posture unless it is compared with something or with good posture, right? So you have to demonstrate the problematics with the existing structure before the existing structure can do things. Now, one of the things I want to be clear about, and to go back to your point about the large number of neurodivergent folks in tech, right? It's not the presence of a population that can drive change, but where that population is located, right? If you have a large number of neurodivergent folks who are pressed into positions within tech where they cannot exercise change, where they cannot develop tools that align with their lived experience, then you have, honestly, you have the situation of tech's exploitation of neurodivergence for neoliberal and capitalist aims, right? So tech can say, we have a population of neurodivergent individuals, but these are resources that we are exploiting in line with the benefits their neurodivergence provide us, not individuals that are co-collaborators in the development of assistive technologies. So there's a couple of wrinkles there. Typically there is some tension there. Yes, I would like to see more disabled, more neurodivergent work in tech, but I would also like to see more projects driven by that experience, right? And if we did, we might, you know, we might see a wide variety of different things. For example, the sensor technology being currently developed for robots, which are now being used by the NYPD to terrorize people, could be pretty beneficial for mobility devices, right? Which would enable, say, adaptation to environmental conditions as the device moved through the environment, right? But nobody thinks of it in that way because, if I'm to be real honest, the needs of disabled persons aren't a priority for technology.
Okay, thank you.
So there's a question through the queue. Here's a question from Ben. Thanks. How do you think we can transfer/move to a non-ableist racist AI structure or minimize these tendencies to the highest amount practicable?
So I'm going to give the unpopular answer is abandon these projects. Just throw them in the dustbin of history, or say abandon the abandon the presumptions that direct these processes or these projects, right? Because when I was doing this research, particularly with regards to emotion recognition, I found like two underlying themes which went into a notes pile for another paper. One, detecting people with autism. Two, detecting people's relative positive emotional states so that you can better organize a work or education environment in line with, say, neoliberal ideologies, right? So given that these are the kinds of ends projected for this technology, either you're going to have to grapple with these ideological structures as organizing forces and consequently admit that they're organizing forces, or you need a bunch of people to say, throw these projects out because they serve no purpose, right? So one of my, I guess, most negative perceptions here is that these tools, insofar as they're marketed as, say, advances in human labor, advances in making life easier, one, ignore making life easier for whom, and two, are really just ways of reorganizing the world through a particular or through a piece of technology that is considered objective, right? So how do we do this? Well, one, you can repurpose the technology to do other things, right? What would happen if we say, and this is slightly ironic, what would happen if neurodivergent folks used, say, the technology to understand neurotypical folks, right? That would be literally flipping the script. And nobody wants to do that. The other way you could think about this is, again, either abandon the technologies or develop the technologies in conversation with disabled people, right? That's really the long and short of it, but the only way you can get there is, again, disruption of the ongoing ideologies which structure the field, right? I hope that answers the question. It's not a really happy answer, but
here's a question from Andrea Pitts. Thank you, Dr. Flowers, for that fantastic presentation. My question is about AI in climate modeling and other forms of environmental research driven by AI. How might we end up continuing to see the forms of colonial ableism that you're describing in terms of climate modeling and other environmental AI applications? Additionally, how might we interpret the forms of data sovereignty movements among indigenous data practitioners as responses to the forms of colonialism and ableism that you're so carefully critiquing in your work? Many thanks.
So the first question is actually super interesting because I recently gave a talk about the ways in which disasters and emergencies, including climate emergencies, are had experientially differently for disabled persons, right? And in that talk, I concluded that crip time might be a better way of thinking about the procession of a kind of disaster, because in the UN report on climate justice for disabled persons, it stated that disabled persons will be more affected by slow-moving climate disasters because of our unique embodiment. What I found was missing there was it assumes that a slow-moving climate disaster is experienced temporally at the same rate of time as by all subjects, right? A disabled person will experience a climate disaster well ahead of non-disabled persons due to the disruption of crucial infrastructure that needed to, I don't know, keep us alive, right? So it is not the case that climate disasters are experienced differently. So when we're thinking about climate modeling, right, our models all assume a unified experience of the progression of, say, climate change, right? Specifically insofar as this progression is either charted by changing in weather patterns or, say, change in the impact of inclement weather on infrastructure. What I would say is if we're gonna keep modeling climate vis-a-vis AI, and that's probably one of the more beneficial uses of it, because that's, I mean, like detecting spotted leopards in the wild, right? The human aims and interests involved there are not realistically for the marginalization of people. It's to describe an event so large that our own subjective experience cannot, take it into account. But one of the things that I would say is we need to introduce a little bit more subjectivity, right? We need to introduce ways in which ways in which time is experienced differently if we're going to chart climate change and its effects on population, right? So it's not simply modeling climate change that I think we're asking about, but modeling climate change and its effects on other people, the social fact of climate change. And the social fact of climate change is different for disabled persons, given the ways in which climate change disrupts our world well in advance of the disruption of a non-disabled world. Now, with regards to data sovereignty, how might we interpret those? Those might be how might we interpret forms of data sovereignty movements among indigenous data practitioners as responses? I would say these are non-ideal solutions to a non-ideal world, and we should probably look at ways in which we can learn from data sovereignty movements for the kinds of purposes for disabled persons. And there is some ongoing work here. An AI Now report spoke to some of this, and I actually did not have time to cover it in my talk, but privacy and sovereignty, especially for disabled persons, is tantamount, because if we say put it in a educational context, for a disabled student to get accommodations, they have to engage in a form of like hostile disclosure of their history of disability and the ways in which it impairs them in an educational environment, right? And this is a profound disclosure of one's, say, one's medical history that is not often thought of in the context of, say, data privacy. Now, said disclosure is protected typically by FERPA and so on and so forth, but if we're going to be really clear about it, it's a degree of exposure that disabled persons must endure that able-bodied persons simply don't, right? So this, I think we need to rethink in the mode of data privacy, particularly when an institution denies your accommodation, right? You have exposed yourself in particular ways to an institution that says, no, you're not disabled enough for us to help you. So we need to, I think we need to think seriously about the kinds of data disclosure that we as disabled people are required to do simply to exist, and how that as a question of privacy is often overlooked.
Great. The next question comes from Dai H. Thank you for your thought-provoking presentation. Regarding your comment about AI and executive functioning, and I read selfishly about ADHD here, I was wondering what your thoughts are about, e.g., what the collaboration is of AI and behaviorism in the management / governing and testing of neurodivergent folks.
So August, as you were reading the question, I kind of sighed and shook my head. You should never automate diagnostic criteria for disability, just full stop, right? Nor should you automate any other, and I think what you're getting at is any other technology or process of, say, determining whether or not a person has a given disability, right? These things are social processes that happen in transaction with other people, which is why it is, as most disabled folks know, it is really important to find a good clinician, a good medical practitioner that doesn't reproduce hermeneutic injustice and actually takes seriously your reporting of your experience. An algorithm can't do that. Even an algorithm full stop can't do that. And if it could, then we wouldn't be dealing with an algorithm, we'd be dealing with another form of life, because it could respond socially to the ways in which we're talking. And given the world that we exist in, I don't want to see what that form of life would look like, especially not in a diagnostic or clinical setting. But to your broader question, the only value I would see in collaboration of AI and behaviorism in the management, governing, and testing of neurodivergent folks is one, so there is no benefit there. There could be benefits if we understood them as attempting to develop better accessibility aids. I often joke with folks that I would kill for well, maybe not kill, but I would love a Siri that recognized my own neurodivergence and warned me when I like schedule 3 conferences back to back, right? Because typically if I'm involved in the day-to-day practices, some of those things will slip my mind due to my unique perception of time. If I had a device that said, hey, this might not be a good idea, would you like to do something else? Or you're doing this, perhaps you should, reconsider, right? That might be valuable. And see, the distinction there is it doesn't tell me what to do. It offers, it says, this is a thing that you are doing, develop your own solution. This is different from what I would call nudging technologies, or more pejoratively, nanny technologies that serve to police and discipline you in line with a thing. This is something that says, I am noticing a feature of your experience that will lead to problems for you down the line. Perhaps we should come up with a solution. It is a collaborative piece of technology rather than a disciplinary piece of technology, which gets me to a thread that runs through many of these questions. None of the technical applications that I've talked about are collaborative pieces of technology. And by collaborative pieces of technology, we can think of mobility aids or other accessibility devices that work together with a disabled person to enable the extension of their body through the world. The device and the person collaborate to open up new possibilities of being. Every piece of technology that I've talked about thus far is a non-collaborative option. It's a disciplinary option that says you will align in this way in order to do X, right? What I'm talking about are collaborative technologies. Those are the things that would truly revolutionize the ways in which AI and machine learning and other technologies interact with disabled persons.
There's a clarificatory follow-up that came through from Di H that says, I was more thinking about what your reflection is on how AI is currently functioning in purpose of behaviorism. I'm not sure if you wanted to clarify further, or if you think you've covered.
Sure, I can clarify further. Not great. AI has no business in behaviorism, and the ways that behaviorism is used in AI, like many other fields, is massively problematic. Right? It reproduces all of the concerns that we might have with behaviorism, albeit in an objective framework, which has particularly deleterious effects on disabled persons.
Unless there's objection, I'll take this opportunity to ask my own question. So earlier in your talk, you mentioned some concerns about mythologizing AI as being sort of the source of things rather than a vehicle or a conduit for problems that don't originate from the AI itself. I'm curious what you think about whether there's some deliberate role or deliberate actors in continuing this sort of mythological AI story and sort of where that comes from.
Yeah, it's incredibly deliberate, right? So as I said about statistics, right, once the statistician was shrined as the arbiter of an objective kind of perspective on the world, the import of the statistician leapt, right? This is where we get Moneyball. This is where we get Steve Kornacki. This is where we get 538. This is where we get all of the other statistical modeling technologies that we take to be predictive of some element of our social world as if they are, say, objective and correct. So there's a vested interest, not only culturally, but I mean, capitalistically, in maintaining the perception of an objective technology that will usher in a brand new world. And so when I say mythologize, right, at least in the Deweyan sense, it is to personalize and attribute agency of its own to these things that possess no agency outside of the human aims that direct them. It is also to, say, draw on Thomas Alexander, to treat them as organizing principles of the world. So if we mythologize AI as making life easier, as ushering in a new revolution in human civilization, that becomes an organizing principle of the world. And insofar as hopefully this talk has demonstrated, the very structures of the fields that produce AI are organized around ableism and racism and typically refuse to grapple with it. Your mythos, right? Your organizing principle for this bright new future is racism, ableism, so on and so forth, right? And so there's a vested interest in maintaining this as it extends the colonial project onwards into the future. There's also vested interest in maintaining this as, you know, the demography of the fields that create these technologies doesn't look like me, doesn't look like most of us here at the conference, right? So, and this is a complicated thing to say because members of the field will get incredibly angry when you say it, right? You're holding back progress. You are standing in the way of a revolution that could transform the ways that humans live, right? And all of these arguments simply reinforce the notion that they're not wedded to producing technology for the sake of improving or for the sake of helping all humanity. They're wedded to a mythologization of the technology, which itself has become a moral order, which must be defended at all costs, right? And so there is vested interest in doing all of this.
Great, thanks. So this will be our final question, and it comes from Morgan. Often it's disabled or neurodivergent children who are on the receiving end of these technologies. Should and how should children be involved in creating technologies for their personal use?
Yes, but, right? So children, like every other vulnerable population, have specific concerns, but they also have specific experiences, right? So this is to say that if we want to involve children in creating technologies for their personal use, we need to ask them, what would you like this thing to do? How would this thing help you? How would you work together with this? Rather than deciding in advance what is good for a child. And this is particularly important when we think about, say, disabled children. Now, to be clear, children are in a process of growing, and as they are in a process of growing, they have what I would call a limited fund of experience, right? Which is not a pejorative, judgment about children. It is a statement of the fact that, for example, many children have never driven cars, right? Many children need to learn not to put their fingers in outlets or to touch a hot stove, so on and so forth. They have to learn the features of their world such that they can navigate it better, right? And so if we want children to be involved in creating technologies for their personal use, we need to start with how they navigate the world. What do you see the world as? How do you move through the world? How do you engage with the world? And then go from there. Now, this is not to say that we need to put children in a lab and experiment on them with facial tracking or emotion recognition technology is currently the de jure way of doing this. This is to say that we might want to give a child a piece of technology and say, play with it, right? And see what happens. We need to, actually, let me go all the way back. We need to refine the experimental methodology whereby we develop children's technology and not assume that children simply want simplified versions of technology for adults, right? We need technology that aligns with, enriches, and develops their experience. And this is crucially important for disabled children, right? We need technology that allows them to extend themselves through the world in their own unique ways without trying to discipline them in line with the expectations for how a child should be. As you know, anyone who grew up in, say, the mid-90s and had to go through the initial teething phases of the development of the of IEPs and the restructuring of IDEA and so on and so forth, right? If you want children's assistance in creating technologies, you need to treat their experience as valid, and then you need to offer them opportunities to, say, play with that technology so you can see how they interact with it. And then you should engage in a process of development that enriches that interaction, that allows that interaction to grow. We shouldn't impose our own kind of perceptions on what and how children experience the world.
Excellent. Well, with that, please all join me in thanking our excellent speaker.